Today I will be installing this ACT SB7-HDSS clutch and this Verus clutch fork and pivot. Okay, these are the tools that you'll need to replace your clutch. You need a T55, some 12mm sockets, some 14mm sockets, some 17mm sockets, some extensions, some 14mm wrenches, some 17mm wrenches, some ratchets, something to pop off body panel clips, a torque wrench, a breaker bar, a clutch tool, something to pry with like a screwdriver or a pry bar, something to bang with soft like a brass hammer, and then a transmission jack. Okay, our first step is going to be removing this pan with these plastic clips and a couple of 10 and 12 mils, and then we remove this cover. Okay, the next step is to remove the front pipe, and to do that, since I have ACE and there's no space, you have to go in with an extension through the wheel well. These are 17 mil. Okay, now we got to remove this bolt right here. That's a 17 mil, and then these two right here. It's a 12 on this side and then a 14 on this side, and then this drops. And then I got to remove this resonator also, so I can remove the drive shaft, which is behind it. Now that we got the front pipe and the mid pipe out, we can drain the transmission, and you just take this bolt out. I would take the top one out first so it doesn't glug, and they're just like a Allen. Okay, now you just crack this and then take this out and then catch it in a pan. Make sure you have gloves on because this gear oil smells like shit, and this is a T55. Okay, we got both the holes out, and now we're just draining into this. This stuff smells really bad, so make sure you also do it in a ventilated place. Okay, this is the bottom plug in the transmission, and there's a magnet on there. And this is how you can see how well your transmission is wearing. So my fluid is 2 seasons old, and it has not that much buildup on there, but you can just clean it off. And this is what it looks like new. So looks like for 3.5 seasons of washing my car, the trans is holding up pretty well, which is good. So one thing you're going to have to do is rotate the drive shaft to get the bolts out. So save yourself some time and take off the e-brake and put yourself in neutral, otherwise you can't rotate the drive shaft. So the only way I can get these bolts out that I found is with a 14mm and a wobble and a big impact. Unfortunately, the only 1/2-inch drive sockets I have are deep sockets. So you may not need a wobble, but with a deep socket you definitely do. So it's 14 on this side and then a 14-wrench on there, and it comes right off. Okay, the next step is to take the drive shaft, support brace out. They're just 14 mils. And then the shaft should sink like this. Okay, so with a pry bar, you just put it in here, this little gap. They're on 2 sides out of the fork. And push against the differential, and this pops off. And now you can just slide this out and your drive shaft's out. Okay, now we want to remove these 2 14mm bolts that hold the clutch cylinder in. Now that you have the clutch cylinder out, just tuck it up here so it has some place that's not dangling by this cord. And then our next step is to unclip those 2 clips down there. So just get a pick or something and open them up. The next step is to remove this ground right there, and it's just a 12 mil. Don't lose this bolt though, so I'll just put it right back in. So if you haven't done this before, there's a shift boot right here with a pin on the driver's side. So I'm just going to cut right here so I can get in there and pull the pin out so I can disconnect the linkage. Okay, so I cut that, and then here is the pin right there that we need to pull out, and you can just pull that out with some pliers. Okay, so I pulled the pin out and I pulled this little, I guess, washer out and disconnected the shift linkage and pulled the boot off, and I put it back on so I didn't lose the pieces. Now there are two hook clips up here that you have to pull out. Okay, right here is the pin thing, and you flip it up and then you can pull it out. Okay, before we go any further, you want to support the transmission with the transmission jack, and then get a jack or something and a piece of wood and support the engine by the oil pan so it doesn't tip over when you pull the trans out. Okay, now remove the transmission brace, and it's just these four 14mm bolts. You actually have to remove this from the transmission, so it's just 4 bolts that hold this thing in, also 14 mils. Now we remove the 6 14mm bolts that hold the transmission in. Okay, now you got to remove the 14 mil bolt right down here next to the starter. It's actually easier to get to it from underneath with an extension and a wobble, but you also have to get that bolt sticking out there. You can't get an impact in there, so you have to get a breaker bar. So I actually missed one bolt on the starter. It's right down there. It really sucks getting out. If you have a catch can, you have to take it off and move it down. Okay, before I pulled the transmission, I just bungeed the starter up here so it dangled. And now you take off all of the 12 mil bolts, and then the pressure plate and the flywheel, or the pressure plate will come off, and then you take the flywheel off. After a little bit of prying, the clutch and the clutch and pressure plate will come out, and now we just have to remove those bolts to remove the flywheel. Okay, I got my clutch and my flywheel out, and as you can see from the coloring, it's taken quite a bit of heat and wear. The flywheel's not terrible, it's not great. Same with the pressure plate, but this thing... Okay, now we just pull out the 2 clips from there with some pliers, pull off the throwout bearing, and pop out the fork, and then we have to pull out this... Where's the light? You gotta pull out that little wire thing in there, and then we can start replacing stuff. So as you can see, this is my old throwout bearing, this is the new one, and listen to this. Yeah, this thing's pretty shot. Okay, now we need to grease the fork, so it's going to be in this hole right in there, in that hole, there, and there. Okay, next thing we need to do is take off this pivot, and that's just a deep socket 19, and we will replace it with the Verus. And I don't think it has a torque spec, so I'm just going to impact it in a little bit and then put a little Loctite on it. Okay, you can see that I installed the pivot. Now I'm just going to clean off the spline and the thing the bearing goes on, and probably clean out the bell housing a little bit because there's a lot of shit. Okay, I now brake cleaned most of this, and now I'm just going to snap in my fork. Although it's weird, it looks like I got a little contact with something back here. So, I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, now I'm just going to put a little grease on the pivot. And then a little bit of grease on this surface where the ball, or where the throwout bearing lays. Not a lot, just a little. And then I'll put a little on the inside of this too. Okay, I got everything in place. Now I'm just going to install these little clips, and then I'm going to push on the fork to make sure that it moves. Okay, got everything in there, and yep, it moves, so that's good. Okay, this is my new flywheel, and it's very important to brake clean this surface because it's covered in oil to keep it from rusting, and if you don't do that, it's not going to work very well, or smoke, or who knows. So I'm going to brake clean this, and I'm going to put it in, and there are these bolts right here. They're 35 foot-pounds and then torqued down to 63, and with blue thread locker. Okay, so as you can see, I got the flywheel in place, and I pre-thread locked the bolts and then put them in just to stay in place. And now I'm going to torque them down to 35 foot-pounds in a star pattern, and then 63. Okay, in order to prevent the flywheel from spinning, the easiest way I found is just stick a screwdriver right there. And now it's all torqued down, and I'm going to clean off one more time because my dirty hands have been all over it. Okay, this is the new pressure plate and surface. It's oiled, so we're going to have to clean this and this off with brake clean again and then install it. Okay, now I'm going to lightly grease the splines in here to provide it grease, and use the clutch alignment tool to install the clutch. And make sure the side that says transmission side faces out. Okay, you can see that I got the clutch preliminarily in, and now I'm going to put the bell housing, or sorry, the pressure plate around there, and I'm going to make sure that this tool slides in and out very easily. And then bolt it down to 14 foot-pounds. Okay, I've torqued down all the bolts, and now to check, yep, the tool slides in and out perfectly. So now we just got to grease the splines on the transmission and put the transmission back and put the starter back on. Okay, now I lightly greased the splines, and now I have to put the transmission back in. Okay, now that we got it on, we're going to torque those bolts down to 37 foot-pounds. Okay, now what you want to do is you put these clips in and turn them down. You might have to wiggle this shift thing to get them to line up in the hole. Then you just connect your shift linkage and test to see if you can shift. Okay, now we torque down these bolts. 48 for these four and 34 for those. Okay, now that we got the drive shaft spline in, we can put this in. These go 35 with blue Loctite, and then the back drive shaft is 57 with blue Loctite. For the overpipe, connect these 17 mil and torque them down to 27 foot-pounds. Okay, now that we got the mid pipe down and torque to the front pipe and the back, we need to, I don't know if there's a torque spec to this, but just make it till it's tight. And then fill up, or close this hole with the magnetic plug, 27 foot-pounds. You then fill it with gear oil until it starts dripping out of the top one, and then 27 foot-pounds. Okay, once you fill up your transmission and torqued everything down, you install these two underbody panels, and you are done.